Hello, sweet people. We're in Vermont. We're watching Mama on the hill. Is Mom up there? I'm Gesine Prado, and I'm the hostess of Baked in Vermont. And tomorrow on Food Network Canada is the season finale of season 1 of Baked in Vermont. And we're going to be making some amazing things, some brunch items. What else do we have? Some eggs Benedict. What else was in there? What else did we do? We made cider that whole time, but I also made this huge slab pie that was amazing with a lattice on top, but it's a very large pie. So today I wanted to show you how I make this pie normal size, traditional size, because it's got a gorgeous lattice and it's really easy to do. And one of my great baking tricks is that I never build a lattice on top of an assembled pie. I always build it off to the side. Why? Because it stays perfect. So if you ever see this in a magazine and you're like, that lattice is so perfect, mine never looks so good, it's because they never build it on top of the pie, or it's fake. That's another option. And if you build it on top, the dough gets hot. It also gets sticky from the filling, and it gets all those juices staining the lattice before it's baked. You want to see all the bubbles coming out of it, but you don't want it to be all gooey before it goes into the oven. So I'll show you a few tricks, and I really hope you enjoy the show tomorrow. And if you have any questions at all, well, about baking, I don't know about anything else but baking, please ask. So first thing, half sheet of parchment, very important. And the other thing you can't forget is that you have to dust it with flour. If you don't, your lattice will stick. This is like a little magic trick. It's very impressive. So just dust it. And then here I have 4 strips of 1.5 inch lattice. My dough, and I'll show you how to make the dough tomorrow, is super cold when I work with it, because as I transfer it back and forth, I don't want it to get like thin in the middle and thick on top. I want it to keep its shape exactly. So I have 1.5 inch thick large strips, 4 of those, and then 14 half-inch strips. Haha, write it down. So this is for a 9-inch pie. Today I'm making a rather shallow one in a disposable tin. You know, you can buy really fancy pie tins. They're usually ceramic, sometimes they're glass. And they look great, right? They're fantastic looking things, but they are so thick that when you bake them, the bottom is always raw or just has a hint of heat in it, or it gets melty. And so oftentimes you'll have to blind bake the bottom crust. I love to use these cheapo tins because they're so thin that the heat goes straight through. So you can just build your pie, no extra blind baking time, which is like, could be 15 to 20 minutes. You get a gorgeous bottom crust and a great lattice, because I'm going to show you how to do it. So first, I put my first 2 strips down. These are my thick strips. And then in the middle, I will put 3 thin ones. And what's important too is that when you are rolling out your dough, not only should it be nice and cool, but you also have to make sure that you have enough flour down that it never sticks to your work surface, so that when you pick up your dough, you have to make sure that it doesn't stick, because if it starts sticking to your work surface as you're transferring it, then it can lose its shape. You want them to be perfect. And in my classes, in my classroom, I also give students rulers. They're like old school, elementary school rulers. I'm like, if you want to be really persnickety, just like measure everything out. And Ruthie, the dog, has heard that pie is in the works, so she totally broke in, and she's just waiting for me to like drop a piece of pie for her. It's not going to happen, Ruthie. Ain't gonna happen. So 14 strips of this 1.5. So this is how I start. I start with 2 thin strips, 1 thick, 3 thin, write it down, 1 thick, and 2 thin ones. Now we're going to start to weave. And don't forget, before you even start doing this, you have to flour your surface. Flour your surface. So I'm going to bend back every other one, every other strip. And I keep touching my dough. And when I teach, I always tell my students, touch my dough, because I want them to feel how cool it stays. Because as you are building a lattice, you have to make sure that the dough maintains that wonderful chill. Otherwise, as you're doing this, as you're bending back the strips back and forth, if it starts getting warm, the actual dough will start getting distorted and it will start getting thin in places and thick in other as you start moving it around. So just keep touching it, keep making sure that it's nice and cool. And now, the trick I always tell my students is that you look for the one that is covered. If you can't just look at it and know which one to pull back, because it's every other one, you say, which one is covered? That one's covered, that one's covered, that one's covered, that one's covered, that one. Those are the ones that we're gonna pick up. And that's when we're gonna start weaving. So those go up. Any questions, please ask. I hope you have enjoyed Baked in Vermont as much as I love making it. And as much as I love baking it. It is the best. I bake every day. People ask me, when you aren't working, which is baking, what do you do? Well, I like to bake, quite frankly. And my husband, Ray, who's doing the camera, likes to eat my baking. Wouldn't you say, Ray? He just nodded. Any questions, please ask. Now, this is my blitz dough. It's a very, very flaky dough. I call it the jazz hands of dough. And here's an example. So this is what it looks like when it's baked up. I don't crimp the sides of my dough because I like to see all that flakiness. If you work for the flake man, you got to see it, right? I think you'd agree. So I have my second strip in the middle down. Dun dun. Putting that out. And the other thing that I think is so important is the right rolling pin as well. I always use a French pin that's tapered, and it really helps in controlling the dough and shaping it. And I'll show you what I mean by that. In that you can, like I've got to make a round out of a piece of dough that's not necessarily that round. And that pin really helps you make everything gorgeous. So now you will see I have a pattern starting to emerge. So I like this pattern a lot because it looks like plaid, where I box in the thin strips with the thick strips. And you can do this with lattice that's all the same size, totally up to you. I just like this because it's not more work than having a lattice that's all the same strip size, but it just looks a lot fancier. And it looks like you did a lot more work, which is kind of the goal of all this, is that we look really, really, really fancy, and it looks like we just went through all this work, but in reality, it wasn't any harder than just doing a regular old lattice. So now that I have boxed it in with the thick ones, then I'm gonna finish the ends. Every other one. Just look at the one that's covered. I continue.
What's your favorite thing to bake?
The question is, what is my favorite thing to bake? And I'll be totally honest with you. I don't have a favorite thing to bake. Whatever I'm baking is my favorite thing to bake. And it's because I love all my babies. And I will go through jags of baking one thing or the other. Maybe because I'm having a craving or because of the season. Or Ray has said, oh, I'm really in the mood for, recently he's like, he realized how much he liked butterscotch. And that was very exciting because I'm like, I'll start making lots of butterscotch stuff. But the things I love teaching the most are, I think I love teaching, pie dough is really up there. Because when anybody comes to my pie classes, they've usually had a lot of trouble in the past making pie dough. A lot of people do. And they hate to admit it that they skulk into the grocery store and they go into the refrigerated aisle and they get the pie dough that's already made. And I'm like, how dare you? Because it is really so easy, but it is so much fun to show students the beauty of a well-made pie dough and just how easy it is. Easy as pie, really, really. And in this upcoming episode, the season finale of season 1, I'll show you one of my favorite pie recipes that is so zippy, literally zippy. It's zip, zip, zip. It's so fast and it's flaky and it's delicious. And I think it's, it's even faster than going to the grocery store and getting the dough because you have no drive time. So now we have our lattice. And what I would do is I would put this in the refrigerator but I have another one ready to go that's already refrigerated. But before we go there, I'm going to do the bottom crust. So, do you know what this is called? Anybody? Anybody? It is called bench flour. And all bench flour is a little bit of flour that you set aside from your regular old flour, and you put it on your bench, which this is, and you use it for flouring your bench because you don't want to stick your grubby hands back into your bag of flour because they're grubby. And when I was teaching at King Arthur Flour once, one of my students went to the shop. They have a baker shop there, and asked if he could buy a bag of bench flour. And they laughed and laughed. And I said, don't laugh at him, because I literally made a big deal of having bench flour because you don't want to sully the rest of your flour. And he thought it was a special flour, but it's just the flour that you used for making the pie. So,
Sandra wants to know if you've ever made a flapper pie.
Sandra wants to know if I've ever made a flapper pie. What is a flapper pie? Tell me, what's a flapper pie? I might have, and I just didn't know it. Should I be dancing like the Charleston? Dun, 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 dun. I don't know. Is it like a chess pie? Is it a sugar pie? I've made vinegar pie. I've made maple pie. I've made all kinds of cream pies. I'm curious, what's a flapper pie? Tell me. So, I'm going to make a round for my bottom crust. And I started off with what was essentially a rectangle. And you're thinking, that's not a round. The first thing I do with my rectangle, I get it into something of a square shape. And I make sure, just like I did with my top crust, that it's nice and cool. And I can see streaks of butter throughout this. And I know that this is going to be so stinking flaky. And now, this is what I was talking about the French pin. It's got this lovely bend to it. And I use that to shape the dough. So I will take it and literally put my weight right here, and I will gently shape it so it starts looking like a round. And the other thing that I never do with pie dough is I never roll over. And that means you never roll over the edge. Because what you do is you end up compacting this part of the dough, making it twice as thin as the rest of the dough, and it ends up sticking to your work surface. So this way, if you just keep moving your dough, you can make sure that you're not sticking, and you can make sure that you continue shaping it so that it's all the same depth. And one thing I love to do is, oh, Ruthie's so excited about the pie, she can't take it. One thing that I make sure to do with my pie dough recipes is that they're usually just the formula is usually a little more than traditional pie crust, because I like to play. I like to make sure that I have plenty of pie dough so that if I'm going to make a tight lattice, that I'm not running out of space, and that in case a part of the pie does not look great, you want extra dough to like have a little cutout here or there just to cover up your little boo-boo. And no one needs to know. You can say you intended it all along. And you can't do that when there is a pie crust recipe where you just have just enough dough that you do the bottom crust and barely a top crust. I love to have dough to play, and I think that's important. And I love pie crust. I love it so much. Okay, so now I'm pretty certain that this is big enough to line my tin, but I'm just going to make sure. There it is. Like I said, I'm using this really thin, cheap old tin because it bakes perfectly. So now this is a great dough. I can just fold it over, transfer it to my pie tin. Ta-da! But before I go any further, I want to make sure that the dough is actually sitting in the tin. And what that means is that right now it's just lounging. I want it literally sitting in. So I take the dough and I fold it like that, and I do tap, tap, tap. And you'll see that little crease in there. So that is my insurance that it's actually sitting in there. It won't slump down while it's baking because it's simply lounging like it's in a hammock.
Mary wants to know if you've done baked donuts.
Oh, Mary wants to know if I've done baked donuts. Well, I'll tell you something exciting. In this upcoming episode of Baked in Vermont, baked donuts, baked apple cider donuts. So yes, I do quite a few baked donuts. Personally, I love fried donuts, but these are so good and they actually taste like traditionally fried donuts. And the apple cider flavor is so intense and beautiful in these donuts. You will not believe it. So good. So I like that question.
Where's the recipe on Food Network?
The recipe for the apple cider donuts will be on Food Network Canada. Go check it out. It's there waiting for you. So the next thing I do before anything else is I'm going to dock the dough, which simply means I'm going to poke holes all over the place. And if you're blind baking, which means you actually bake this bottom crust separately. You do that so in case it decides to bubble up and dome. And you also do it for better heat circulation so that your bottom crust bakes more evenly, which is really important. But I have another trick for you. This is called crust dust. And what crust dust is just an even measure of flour and sugar. So in this jar, it's probably a third cup of sugar and a third cup of flour, and then I shake, 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 shake. And I always keep it handy when I make a pie that has a juicy filling, and I take about a teaspoon and then I sprinkle it on the bottom right here. Make sure that you get all the little areas of the bottom of the crust. So then as your pie hits the heat of the oven, it starts to thicken before it actually hits the crust. It's fabulous. It's a great way to make sure that docking the dough, the crust dust, these are things that make sure that your bottom crust stays nice and crisp and doesn't get soggy. Now I'm going to add our filling, but I like to make sure that I trim all this. And you see there's lots of extra dough here. So in the event that when I put my top crust on, it doesn't look great, I've got tons of dough left over that I can roll out and use a cookie cutter and put a maple leaf perhaps, a heart, who knows? And if you have any other questions, ask away. In this upcoming episode, we also have so many great things. I'm doing Eggs Benedict. And the way I poach my eggs for a crowd, because I had invited a ton of people over to help me cider my apples that are just clinging onto the tree. So we need to do something with them. I'm baking for a crowd. And so I have to poach eggs for a crowd. And I do them in a muffin tin. It is so cool. So that way you get the perfect poached egg and you can do a lot of them all at once. It's brilliant. Also, one of my favorite things, I make English muffins from scratch. And they're so stinking easy as making pancakes, if not easier. I know, right? It's fantastic. And we're also making a huge slab pie and those baked donuts. And I managed to make a cocktail in there somewhere. I am not drinking throughout, but I do at some point. Whenever I save dough like this that's nice and flaky, I just don't scrunch it together. I make sure that it's layered, one piece on top of the other, like that. And then I gently press it just to make sure that's homogeneous. And then I cover it in saran wrap like this. See, look at all those pieces. And then I roll it out like that just to make sure. I made sure that it was a nice and flaky dough. When I roll it out the second time, it'll be just as flaky because I took all the time to make sure that I didn't ruin the flake. So that's aside. Now I've got my filling. I've got some plums here. And in this I've got some sugar, about a 1/4 cup, and instant clear gel, which is a thickening agent. That is fabulous, with a little bit of nutmeg in there as well. And I just make sure that it is nice and combined and that all the little pieces are coated. And instant clear gel is a modified cornstarch, and the thing that's great about it is that when it bakes up with things that are like jewel toned, especially berries, they don't get cloudy in the baking. And sometimes it's hard to tell exactly how much thickening agent to add to a fruit. And this one happens to be one that if you just happen to add too much, sometimes pies can taste really gummy. The texture goes totally off if you add too much thickening agent. This one that is not the problem at all, because what happens is it gets kind of silky and soft, even if you've added too much. So it's really nice. So now I've got my little plums in there. I have some egg wash, which is just 1 egg whisked together with about a tablespoon of water. And so the reason I'm doing it on the edge, I'm trying not to get it over to this side where I cut it, because I want that to jazz hands. That's just glue right now. And now I have, oh Ruthie, I have a crust. I have the top crust. This is my lattice. I refrigerated this one after I made it. And I have it on top of a half sheet pan. Come back and see. It's upside down. And it's very special. And what I do is I hold it like a waiter, and I put my dominant hand, I'm right-handed, underneath here. And this is going to sound much harder than it is. I do this in every one of my pie classes, and everybody's so freaked out. They're like, I can't do it. That looks so scary. And then they do it, and they're like, oh, that was really easy. So try this at home. It's really fun. And you look like a magician when you do it. So you take this parchment, and you start pulling it like a conveyor belt. Toot, toot, toot. Now, I'm going to aim for the edge of the pie. I'm going to tilt the pie just a little bit. Boop. There it is. It's on. It's so exciting. And when it's nice and cool like this, my aim wasn't perfect, right? It's a little off center. I can move it a little. I can move it and get it perfectly on top. And then I'm going to gently adhere the lattice to the edges. And then, since I already trimmed the bottom, I'm just going to follow that line and trim the rest. And, you know, as I said before, I don't crimp this pie because this is such a flaky crust that you kind of want to see all the lattice because it's gorgeous. And it looks very fancy. It looks like you did so much more work than you did. That makes me happy. It looks like you were just working in the kitchen for hours and you're like, it was actually nothing. But you don't say that. You never say that. You're like, yes, thank you very much. I worked really hard on this pie. And then I keep trimming. Any questions, ask away. Baked in Vermont, season 1 finale tomorrow at 11:30. And I'll be making a pie very similar to this, but actually quite a bit bigger. And now, for the grand finale of this pie, I'm going to put a little bit of egg wash. And then, I know you go to the coffee shops. I know you spend some money on cappuccinos. Take some of those brown sugar packets, put them in your pocket, pay for your coffee, because it's always great to have this stuff around for sparkle sugar. You don't have to get that big old bag of sanding sugar. You can just get that lovely turbinado sugar. Dun, dun, dun. And just a little bit of egg wash. And another trick about egg washes is that oftentimes you make it right before you use it. So it's just whisking together that 1 egg and a little bit of water. And you're brushing and it's all fantastic. And all of a sudden that egg white just goes bleh. One way to avoid that is to make it ahead of time, like 20 minutes, with a pinch of salt. And what happens is that salt breaks down that albumin, so it's much easier to wash without that clump of egg white just flopping onto your pie, or whatever your egg white, challah too. I get so excited when I'm egg washing because it's so shiny and gorgeous, and all of a sudden that egg white just goes blech. And then we can't forget, I'm going to roll this out a little bit. Rolly, rolly. This is not my old, I just rolled this out and it's still rolling out beautifully because I handled it so gently. And I'm rolling it with the flake. Any more questions? I'm almost done. So this is your opportunity to ask me any kind of question you like about baking. There we go. And then have a little maple leaf. Hi there. Oh, that's...
How do you avoid the mushy bottom without baking the bottom shell?
So the question is, how do you avoid the mushy bottom without blind baking the bottom shell? So everything I did here with prepping this, from using the really thin tin to docking the dough once I put it in, to using crust dust before I put in my filling, All those things help a lot in making sure that you get a crisp, unsoggy bottom crust, which is key to this. But I gotta say, the tin is the thing. If you have a really fancy thick ceramic one, you're going to have to blind bake it, but the cheaper and more disposable the tin, the better. You will get a crispy, wonderful crust. And if you're bringing it to someone's house, you're not going to lament the fact that you left your really nice pie tin over at your friend's. But wait, there's more. When you're doing it in a tin like this, you can actually, watch, if you spray it, you can actually lift the pie out of the tin like that and put it in a fancier tin and pretend you baked it in that, but the bottom will still be nice and crisp. So here we are. Here's our gorgeous pie. Thank you guys for watching. I've had such an amazing time filming Baked in Vermont for you. And if you have any questions, you can keep asking. I won't go away entirely. I'll keep answering them. And enjoy the show tomorrow. Season 1 finale tomorrow at 11:30. Thank you guys.